pulling the trigger on Malcolm Brogdon, sends out basically nothing, gets back a great piece, albeit at a pretty decent chunk of salary. But if you're, like me and Adam and a lot of other people that were listening to Wick Grossbeck and company talk about how they spend in the tax, well, Wick and everybody else just put their money where their mouth is. Celtics into the tax and getting a good player at that to bring them over the tax. And it was funny. A lot of you out there, and you in the comment sections, and you, Aaron, my mentions, mentioning all of you, and I got into a little bit over the Celtics need a point guard debate. And I was adamant that Boston did not need a point guard, really, to solidify their team. I would have argued at the time that getting Danilo Gallinari was a huge deal for this team because you could have a little bit of half-court scoring at a wing position to help out Jalen and Jason not playing the whole time. But what helps is Malcolm Brogdon kind of also does this too, but also brings the playmaking, facilitating aspect that I think a lot of you wanted. So, as you look at everything, Barrett, it's hard not to – I mean, again, you can talk about the health thing, and we will get into that, but it's hard not to look at the Brogdon trade and say, wow, Boston and Brad and Ime saw what they just went through and said, it would be a perfect guy to put into the middle of this 8-man rotation would be Malcolm Brogdon. They get, a great player for not a lot, and this seems like the most seamless fit humanly possible. Am I wrong about that?
No, I'm completely with you, Evan. And I think two things can be true, right? Because I was in the campus, they don't need a traditional point guard anyway, even though, I really don't even think most of those players exist anymore. Like Chris Paul, who else is a traditional point guard? Because with Smart on the floor this year, the Celtics had a 116.4 offensive rating, and the best team of the NBA were the Utah Jazz at 116.2. But I think two things can be true. You can watch the playoffs and say, what the Celtics could really need to use? Additional playmaking. And that's exactly what Malcolm Brogdon provides. So I don't think it's out of bounds to say he's just an addition to the team. They've already said that he's going to come off the bench. And one of the things I really like about Brogdon is I feel like, okay, yeah, the price probably wasn't as steep as it should be for a guy of his stature because of the fact that he's dealing with injuries. But the Celtics, because of the depth they have, they can use a guy like this and take him on. And the other thing I would mention too is like, people look at his raw shooting numbers and his 3-point percentage, et cetera, was down last year. But if you look at just his catch and shoot numbers, he's 42% right around there for his career. And when he actually played with two guys that are better than him, which he'll be doing here with Chris Middleton and Giannis, that was at 43%. So I just look at what Brad said right after the season. And I liken him to Dave Dombrowski, because Dave Dombrowski, and this isn't a good way. Don't go nuts. This isn't a good way.
I was going to say, we're trading off young pieces for Chris Sale.
No. Well, Dave Dombrowski would tell you in the offseason what he was going to do. Brad Stevens said at his press conference, I need shooting and playmaking. Well, he got shooting in Gallinari, and he got shooting and playmaking in Malcolm Brogdon. It's just refreshing that we have a guy that's telling us exactly what he's going to do, and then he does it. And I think if you go back to what transpired in the finals, the biggest weakness for this team was additional shooting outside of the big two. And then secondarily, the bench, right? The bench was outscored by 37 points in the finals. They were 26th in bench scoring this season at 30.2 points per game. Well, you just strengthened both of those weaknesses. And what did you give up? A first-round draft pick who's going to be like the 29th or we hope the 30th pick? I mean, you didn't give up anything. And look, maybe Neesmith turns out to be something down the road, but it wasn't a work here with this group.
Yeah, and the odds of you hitting at the end of the first round, although Boston's done a good job, Grant Williams, Rob Williams, Peyton Pritchard, Desmond Bain, obviously the one that hurts the most because they had him, but then they had to trade him away. And, it's the exact guy that we need at this point. But it's like, yeah, those guys can be there, but you can also screw that up, pretty easily too. That guy could amount to absolutely nothing. I mean, it's a dart throw. And as you get further down the draft, like the dart throws are harder to nail. I mean, yeah, Jimmy Butler has been found on there. Draymond Green's second round pick. Nikola Jokic is the greatest pick maybe in the history of the NBA, being a second rounder and turning into an MVP guy. Like there are guys there, but like, okay, a lot of that turns into luck, right? And having the right opportunity for said player. Like Boston, given this particular roster, like it's going to be hard for Peyton Pritchard to get time. And he's been in the system for what will now be his third season, and is a great shooter and gives them something. But like now you look at the roster, Payne Pritchard's like maybe not going to play that much at all. Like he might be the next guy moved out for maybe a piece, in their big rotation. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's like, if they pick a guy at 28 or 27 or 26, like, okay, you bring him in, But like, is he just going to be Shemi Ojale and just barely play? And if he doesn't hit corner threes, and he's just not going to, like, you have to understand when you draft a guy, the situation you're putting him in, like it's better for Boston not to have the, you know, the 28th pick, the 29th pick in the draft when the guy that they're getting, Malcolm Brogdon, is going to like play 25, 26, 27 minutes a game for them. So you'll easily take that trade off. This is actually, I was going to get this a little bit, but like, this is the one thing I like about Brad more than Danny is like, Brad is like, we don't care about picks. We don't care about them. Like, if we're going to be a good team, we need to have veterans on this team that fill out the roster better. And I mean, look, it can happen. I'm not saying it can't happen. Like, but the odds of you bringing in a guy at 28 who's going to play serious minutes for you in the playoffs is just not going to happen right now. And as we've seen, this is a team, you know, whose window of opportunity is absolutely right now.
And I think just on Brogdon, and I'll run this comparison by you. And I know it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison in terms of the position, but I felt like, and I know they went to the finals last year and all that, and it was an incredible season. I'm not disputing that. And it was time for Gordon Hayward, and they needed to move on from him, et cetera. He was not happy here anymore. But I think about what Gordon Hayward meant to this team, even if he was a diminished version of his prime. What he was is like, he was the connective tissue of the offense. Whenever he was on the court, they ran better offense. And I look at the numbers going back to his final season here. They had a 115.92 offensive rating with him on the court. Dallas led the league that year at 115.9. He shot 50% from the field. He shot 38.3% from three-point territory. And if you look at Malcolm Brogdon, it just felt like at times in that Golden State series that they didn't really have, outside of Jason Tatum, somebody that could really run a pick and roll. And it may sound simplistic, but they really didn't. And Malcolm Brogdon last year, 87th percentile. I get he was hurt a lot, and as a pick and roll ball handler, shot 47.8%. So he can do so many different things for you. And now coming here, he's not going to be overtaxed, where it felt like in Indiana, he was out of place. And this isn't meant to be an indictment on him because he fits perfectly in with the Celtics, but he's not going to be the best player on a team. Well, if he is, you're not going to be very good, as we saw with Indiana, but big size too. So long wingspan, tall guy that can play the point guard position in terms of the defensive situation. And look, nobody's smart, but he's pretty damn close to it. So if you look at it, this guy was in the 96th percentile last year as an ISO defender, 95th 2 years ago. So it's basically, he fits into the ethos of this team in every sense. You needed a shooter, you needed a playmaker, and you need somebody that can hold up defensively, and he can do all those things. Like, if you were going to drop the perfect fit to come into this team right now, I don't think you could come up with a better player than Malcolm Brogdon just based on his profile.
Yeah, I like your point there. It allows him to stay, excuse me, allows him to stay big, right? One of the big reasons why I was anti go get a point guard is because one of the big advantages that Smart gives you at that position is size, right? Most point guards are not Marcus's size, and his size is a big advantage on both ends. He can post up smaller guards, and he has no problem guarding up or down. I mean, certain guys, I mean, Curry gives everybody problems, so I'm not going to say it's like he's the perfect Steph Curry defender, but Marcus guards most of the guards in the NBA very well. And when you have that as an advantage, right, being big as an advantage, adding 6'5" Malcolm Brogdon in there is only going to enhance your advantage. You know, Brogdon's a heck of a rebounder. I know he only had 6 rebounds per game last year, but, you know, when you put him in a lineup with Miles Turner, who's going to gobble up everything, it's going to be a little more difficult for him. But you're going to be able to stay big, and you can play Smart and Brogdon at the floor at the same time. Like, they're going to be able to stay big on the wing, stay big at guards, and keep that advantage. That was my biggest point with this point guard thing, was like, you're taking, like, what was one of the biggest reasons people loved Boston over Golden State? It was their size. You know, Boston just had way more big guys and way more depth at that spot than Golden State have. Now, that didn't matter because Steph Curry was unbelievable and carried them in game 4, and Boston fell apart in games 5 and game 6, pushing the ball over too much. But, like, adding to your strength, like, it's just something that Belichick does a lot. You know, and if Belichick does, it's probably something we should also consider, is like, don't take away a strength of something just to create a weakness somewhere else, right? Like, if you bring in a smaller guy, well, now you have a deficiency in the defensive end, like when it really matters. And like, at this point, we're talking about when it really matters. And that's the NBA Finals and deep in the NBA playoffs. Like, in the regular season, Boston's going to be a terrific regular season team because of how deep they are now if everybody stays healthy. But now you're thinking about it like, okay, first round, second round, third round, as you saw throughout the entire playoffs, like, the rotation gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And, you know, the guys like Pritchard are on the, you know, can't play because he's too small. Derek White at least gives you some defense you know, his shooting might not be great, but he can at least hang out there defensively long enough to keep him in the ball game. So it's like by adding another guy who allows you to stay big in big moments and playoff moments, this is going to be ginormous. And you know, the injury history is concerning. There's no question. But like, if you go back to his rookie year, I know it's a long time ago and many injuries ago, but you go back to his rookie year in Milwaukee, 26.4 minutes a game. He played 75 games, by far the most of his entire career. I think that the game plan here is, and if you look at the last couple of years, 33 and a half this past year, 34 and a half the year prior, 31 when his first year in Indiana. Like, if you can keep Brogdon in the 26, 25, 27 minute range, like that's going to be, you know, that might help him. I'm not going to say it's going to help him stay healthy because we don't know, but that could help him stay healthier and finding a way to keep, you know, Horford, Rob, Gallo, Jason, like keeping everybody fresh. That is the mission of the regular season. You know, that's what we need to be most concerned about.